So let's get to it. How should the Israeli government react to the Eritrean clashes? We cannot start a conversation without the opening remarks of Dan Perry.
Cracking down on the rioters, who showed quite a bit of chutzpah, is not unwarranted. But I would hope the government experiences a learning moment that spurs understanding that their transparent policy of trying to compel the Eritreans and others to leave by means of petty abuses like denying them work permits and basic social protections may not be the way to go. What's needed is a bit of sagacity and a bit of generosity, qualities that are perhaps in short supply in government circles at present.
A, should rioters be deported? And B, is it all a manifestation of the lack of a distinction between Eritrean regime supporters and opponents?
The reason they protested against this event is because the event was meant to collect funds for the dictatorial regime from which they escaped.
Yeah. Dan Perry.
I think this business of regime supporters is a little bit of a red herring. I mean, most of the people who arrive in Israel are obviously not regime supporters. The horrible, criminal, dictatorial regime of Afwerki does not have any real supporters outside of its immediate circles and their family members. What might have been done is to not allow the representative of that criminal regime, which is the embassy in Israel, to hold their event. I fail to see why that was permitted. Incredible weakness displayed there, nor why the police and others indeed ignored the warnings of the community leadership in Israel, which of course overwhelmingly opposes the regime. And I'm in no way justifying or defending the riots, but it clearly was going to happen. There's precedent elsewhere in Sweden and Canada, and other countries have known enough to basically shut down these events that spark such riots.
If it was not for the Supreme Court, which did everything it can to make it almost impossible for the Israeli government to effectively act against this infiltration, this illegal infiltration into Israel, the problem would have been solved by now. There probably would be very few.
What would you have had the Supreme Court do, Mr. Weitzman?
Okay.
There's a limit. The right-wing governments of Israel typically and systematically propose action that they know is illegal and in their heart of hearts they know is wrong, and they wait for the Supreme Court to strike it down. Israel, under international obligations, cannot, please let me finish as I did you, cannot legally deport these people back to Eritrea, end of story, and other countries in Africa. They never were going to do it. The Supreme Court had to strike it down. The facility in the Negev, whose existence was a bit of a disgrace, also had to be shut down. What's really happening here is that you are taking, I'm sad to say, a problem that is one of the major philosophical questions in the world today. What to do with migrants and whether rich countries have an obligation to accept them, and if so, how many? And you're trying to reduce it to the pettiness of the current squabble in Israel over the Supreme Court. And in so doing, wheeling out these talking points against the court. Honestly, it's beneath you and pitiful.
This is how he sounded, the Prime Minister sounded this morning.
We proposed a series of measures, and unfortunately, they were all rejected by the High Court. One thing we did not propose, and it was a good thing we did not propose it, is the UN outline. The UN outline would have naturalized 16,000 illegal infiltrators and would have created a tremendous incentive for hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Africans who would flood into the state of Israel again.
It would have been a very bad mistake to accept this outline. We should not give any permanent status to any of these people. They should all find themselves back into their countries. The sooner, the better for Israel and for everybody, as we saw, unfortunately, yesterday with this terrible violence in Tel Aviv.
Dan Perry, your thoughts?
Well, Netanyahu himself had proposed it, so let's be kind and say that he seems to be confused about the chronology behind his plan. It wasn't perfect, but it would have deported about half of them and given the other half a more decent arrangement that included some rights. It would have ended the shoddy treatment and projected to the world that Israel will do its little bit to help alleviate this massive problem. In the end, it was a Solomonic plan And as that is not the word that comes to mind when you examine the current state of affairs, I'm not betting the farm that it will be revived. The incompetence and lack of strategy is really mesmerizing here. They let in more people than they needed to because the border was wide open and ended up with a larger number than maybe is even reasonable. But they did nothing decent with any of them. The actual asylum requests accepted by Israel are a tiny handful, which makes Israel have all these people it doesn't want, but also look unkind. It's just very bad. And realistically, the issue here is demographic. And if you zoom out just a little bit, this is a government that is destroying Israel's Jewish majority by insisting on a colonization of the West Bank. Meanwhile, they're so upset about 20,000 Africans. This is penny wise and pound foolish is a phrase that comes to mind, except the magnitude of idiocy, the factor is much more than 100.
Well, I wouldn't say it's silver lining because it's really not a term to be used in this context. But from this point onwards, will the issue of asylum seekers from Eritrea get back to the limelight, or are we days away from national Alzheimer's, Sigal?
I hope very much that maybe something positive will now happen. Up until now, we have now 18,000 Eritrean refugees in Israel. The country only recognized less than 30 of them, less than 30. And that's while all around the world, almost 90% of them are being recognized as refugees. The right way to deal with this problem is to check asylum claims, to give status to those who deserve the status. It's not a permanent status, as you said. It's a status only until it will be possible for them to go back, knowing the Eritrean community, many of them really eager to go back.
Sigal, it's if I may, just a tiny little bit disingenuous, though, because it's not a technical matter of who's a migrant and who's a genuine political escapee. At the end of the day, there is a big philosophical question here of whether richer countries like Israel have a duty to accept people that they don't really want. And I don't think there's a right answer here, but there's a discussion that genuinely should be had. I would even challenge Mr. Weitzman to answer whether you believe that Israel, as a light unto the nations, has a duty to accept any of them.
No, we have our duty to protect the Jewish people and therefore keep people like that out of the country as much as possible and make sure that, yes, humanly they are being sent back to their countries, of course, but they should not be here.
So humanity and the moral imperative are very small incentives for you.
Israel has a duty to the Jewish people, not to non-Jews. I'm sorry, we are very small people.
But we have a legal obligation here.
We have to protect ourselves and keep these people out.
So tribalism at the expense of humanity is the height of your ambition.
They don't want to harm us. They are looking for refuge.
All right. I have a feeling that we will not be solving this hot potato policy item in the 10 seconds we have left. Dan Perry, Sigal Rosen, Amir Weitman, thank you very much for your time, your insight. We appreciate it. We're out for a final 2-minute break, and we're back with much more. Do not go anywhere.